You gonna tell me? What are you made of? Where do you come from? Do you come from Woodstock or from good stock? Oh, or are you from across the tracks? Did you grow up with Ozzie and Harriet for parents, or did you grow up with the Munsters? Are you well bred or just full of bread? I'm just saying. Where were you when God revealed himself to you? Were you on top of the world with no cares, no worries, no troubles, no pain? Or were you in a deep, dark pit with no way out, hopeless and lost? Or did you think that you were on top of the world only to find out later? Anyway, how can we be sure that we will never return to that pit? Especially those of us who did run away from God at one point and then come back. The name of today's message is Hope in This. All right, so please stand for the reading of our scriptures. Stand and cover yourself, if you will. It's not a law, by the way, but it is a custom that the Lord did and all of his Talmudim and their followers did. So we try to be as much like our Messiah as possible. All right, Dave read. It's from Yeshayahu, which is Isaiah 51:1. Dave read. Shimu Eli Rodfe Zedek Mevakshe Yahweh Habitu El Zur Chuzaltem Ve'el Makebet Gor Nukartim. And our next one is from Tehillim, or Psalm 42, which says, Vaya alani mibor shaon mitit ha yaven vayakem al selah raglai konen ashurai. All right, you may be seated. Okay, so we begin with Yeshayahu. Remember, that's Isaiah 51:1. And our first word was Shimu. Should sound familiar. Shama. All right, it's so here, he literally, which is Shema. I haven't said this in a while, so I want to say it now. If I say, hey, I'm really thirsty, everyone within the sound of my voice now heard what I said. I'm sure of that, right? So in the Western world, you've heard me. But in the Hebrew biblical world, not so much, because you have to hear with the ears, which everyone here did. You have to understand with the whole heart. Well, you probably understood. If I said I'm thirsty, you know that something liquid would be nice, right? But there's three pieces to this. The first is to hear with the ears. The next is to understand it. But the third one is you have to act upon it. So if I've said that, you need to act on it in some way in order to have heard me. You either need to say, well, get off your lazy backside and go get something to drink, or get up and get me something to drink, or I suppose you could say if you ignored me, you heard me, because that's an action, right? Anyway, the next word is Eli, which is literally, it's just to me. So it's you listen to me, right? And then it's followed by Rodfe, which is follow after me. It's from Radaf, which is to follow after earnestly. In other words, it's to pursue. So what are you going to pursue? Well, the next word is Zedek, righteousness. It's in a physical sense, it's of straightness, of rightness, of a straight path as opposed to some windy, meandering path, right? Hence, in an ethical sense, it's rectitude, right, what is right and just, what is so or ought to be so. Yov, which hopefully you know that's Job, right? Yov 36:3 says, to my creator I will ascribe rectitude. There's your word. I will ascribe rightness to God. God is right. In other words, I will vindicate his right. He is right. Hence, to judge the right. In other words, it's to judge justly. It's of balances, of a just weight and scale. And that's really what you get down to in the root, which is from Zadok. It's to be right or straight, of the straight path, properly to be stiff or rigid even, used of a lance, hence to be true, sincere, to be right, suitable, hence to be just, righteous, used of God, of his laws, because those are righteous, they're right, they're a straight path as opposed to a meandering path. To have a just cause, to speak the truth or what is right. So the image behind it is of a scale. On the one side you have the weights, and on the other side you have whatever it is, and it's of a balanced scale. It's not something tipped this way or tipped that way, but something that is balanced. That's righteousness. So when we live according to the Torah, we live according to right. We have a right path, and our lives are in balance, maybe not with mankind, but it's in balance. It's right with God. So when you're living according to the Torah and you're living on that right and balanced path, they call you in Hebrew Zedekah. They call you righteous. All right, so that's followed by mevakshe, which is seek me. The word is in PL, which means nothing in English, and it's difficult to explain what what are these? I have the wrong word in my head. I can't get that word out of my head, and I need the right word. What are these? PL, PL, binyanim. I had Talmudim in my head. I couldn't get it out of my head. Binyanim. There's no way to really explain that in English. It's not really important as far as English goes, but it is important in Hebrew. And this is NPL, which is to seek for. It's to choose, to seek for oneself. Especially it is to seek the king's face. In other words, to go to the king or before the king, to wish to go to him, to seek the face of God, to go to God, especially with prayers. If you go to God, you're praying to God in their world. To inquire at an oracle, to inquire a word. An oracle is a word. It's from the root bakash, which is to search, to inquire into, to examine. Its primary power appears to be that of touching and feeling, to search for as done by touching. I need to take that a little further so you really get what's going on here. The Hebrews of old like to use the comparison of a dog digging in the ground. He sticks his nose in there and he's sniffing it, and he sticks his tongue on it, and he sticks his paw on it, and there's a lot of touching going on. He's examining, going after it, trying to fully understand what it is that he's digging up, right? It's the same type of thing. So that's where they get the idea of the touch and generally of the smell and the taste and all that goes with it. We follow that with Yahweh, which is the proper name of God, which, you can say it means that he was, he is to come, he's the existent one, and all that other stuff that they say. But in Hebrew, a noun is just a noun. It's just the proper name of God. And no, God does not have a whole bunch of names. So what about all these books about the 70 names of God, the 100 names of God, the 150 trillion names of God? Well, they're not actually names of God. They're talking about the attributes of God. So if they say Yahweh Shalom, they're saying that God is the God of peace. Peace is an attribute of God. It's not his name. He only has one name, and that's Yahweh. So moving on. We follow that with Ha-Bitu, which is look, he, literally. It's not used in the root, which is Nabat, right? It's in He-Fil, which is that Binyamin thing. It's to look, to behold. And an example we get is found in Yeshayahu, or Isaiah 42:18. It says, look that you may see. Because a lot of people look and don't see. So in this one, it's saying, look so that you will see. Figuratively, it's to regard anything, to have respect to anything. When followed by El, it is to rest one's hope in something. This is very, very important because this is going to be followed by El. I'm just betting on it, right? To rest one's hope in anything. Now, they give another example in Tehillim or Psalm 34:5. It says, they looked to him and were lightened, and their faces were not ashamed. To lighten of the face is you have a sad countenance, or you're the red blushing from shame. And to lighten that is to make you happy, to make you smile. That's what they're talking about. So coincidentally, the next word is El. So remember what happens. Remember that rule: to rest one's hope in something. El, it says Zur. That means rock. It's a stone. It's a pebble. So called as being compact, of a solid mass, a piece of a rock. A rock is a solid, compressed mass, so it's why they call it a rock, azur. It's a rock metaphorically used of God to indicate that he's a refuge, he's protection, he's the protection and the refuge of Israel. By another figure, it's drawn from a query. It is applied to the founder of a nation, even. But what are they talking about drawn from a query? Well, they're talking about the next word, huzavtem, hewn. And literally in this one, it's hewn you. It's to cut, to hew out, especially of stone. And so they had these hammers, if you will, that they bang on the rock to actually, they would cut a trench. Further you go back, they didn't have saws to cut rock like they do now. They had a hammer, and you'd see these guys. I've actually seen it in modern days because some people still do it the old way, So I've actually seen a modern film of someone actually doing that. And the guy had a hammer, and he was just hammering in a straight line. And the further down he went, the further into that little crevice that he made that his arm went. Of course, he was hammering on limestone. And when limestone, before it hits, it has to hit the light before it gets really, really hard. And so if it's fresh, if it's just been uncovered, it's not really all that hard to cut. It takes some time, but it's not what you think of as really hard, right? So it's hewn out of this stone. They give an example from Tehillim of Psalm 29:7. It says, the voice of Yahweh divides the flames of fire. In other words, it sends out divided flames of fire. To give you an image of that, in the Christian world, they think that the first time there was ever the fire from heaven coming down and dancing on people's tongues, they think that happened for the very first time after Yeshua was raised from the grave. But that's not true. This started way back in the wilderness. And when God spoke, literally what we're talking about is the words came out of his mouth like flames of fire, and they divided. That was the cloven. They divided and went into different directions. So it is said that it went into 70 directions because it was the 70 elders who received the word from God's mouth to their mouth. Just like in the New Testament, when the Talmudim were standing literally at the temple, they were not at some guy's house. There was nobody there that had a house big enough that was in this particular group of people. Yeah, the Sadducees had houses big enough, but they were the only people other than Romans. But the rest of the Jews did not have houses big enough to hold 150 or so people in their attic. And then they certainly didn't have a place that was so sprawling that there was a good 3,000 to 5,000 people standing in their front yard. Why would they be standing in their front yard? No, they were in the temple. They were in the house. That's what they called the temple back then. And so when they came down from the upper room at the temple and down into what was called the women's court, which held about 5,000 people comfortably, 3,000 people received it. But they saw the fire of God's voice coming down and dancing on the tongues, just like they used to see in the old days. So everybody, all the Jews there, would have recognized, oh my gosh, this is from the Bible. Because at in that point in time, they hadn't seen anything like this in a good 400, 600, 800 years. It's been a long time. So none of them had seen it in their lifetime, but they were seeing it then. And that's what they're talking about. It's used figuratively to destroy and to slay, because your words can do that. They can be fiery, right? Hosea 6:5 says, I have hewed them by the prophets. In other words, I have declared to them death and destruction. His words you know, came out like fire. His words were fiery, right? Because it was death and destruction. So that's followed by Ve'el, which is just literally, it just means and to. Then we have Makabet. And this one may throw you a little bit, but it's interesting. It's translated as whole, Hole, not with the W, but starting with the H. It is a hammer, properly a hammerer, the person who hammers. In other words, it's used of a strenuous warrior. It's a nickname of honor that was borne by Judas the Hasmonean. You ever heard of the Maccabees? Are you hearing it? Maccabet, Maccabee? Yeah, this is the word. They, uh, it's used of a stone quarry in Yeshayahu 51:1. Oh, how about that? That's the word we're looking at. That's the verse that we're actually looking at. And they gave that as an example. But it's from the root nakab, which is to hollow out, to excavate, hence to bore a hole. So you can dig a hole with a shovel, right? Or you can bore a hole by taking that hammer and cutting out that rock. It makes a hole. All right, so hopefully you're getting that. But then it says bore, the Hebrew word bore, which means pit. It's a pit, especially a cistern. And they give an example from Bereshit, which is Genesis 37:29. It says cisterns cut in stone. Cisterns without water were used for prisons. Did you know that? A sepulcher of frequent occurrence is the phrase, those who go down to the sepulcher. In other words, those who die. It was thought of as a pit in the center of the world. Yeshayahu, or Isaiah 14:19, says, those who are to go to the stones of the sepulcher. And think about it. They carved out holes in rocks and made burial chambers out of them. It's literally what they're talking about. And then they give another example from Yeshayahu 14:15. It says, the recesses of the sepulcher, and it's so that'd be the lower one that's carved out in the stone. It's from the root ba'ar, which is to dig, especially of a well and a pit. So we're talking, digging a hole. It's a hole that's been carved out. Then it says nukartim, which is dug. Literally, it's dug you. It's in pual, which is to be dug out. And then they give the example of Yeshayahu 51:1. What a coincidence. The query, in other words, the query from which you were dug. It's think of a rock quarry. They dug out the rock, metaphorically used of ancestors of a nation. Even it's to bore, to pierce, especially used of boring out anyone's eye. Ooh, that's nasty. All right, so here's my amplified translation of Yeshayahu. That's Isaiah 51:1. Listen with your ears, understand with your whole heart and mind. The heart and the mind in the Bible world was the same thing, one and the same. So if your heart said yes and your mind said no, you were suffering from schizophrenia. I'm just saying. Anyway, so listen with your ears, understand with your whole heart and mind, and act upon what you've heard and understood from me. Follow earnestly after and pursue righteousness, justice, and balance. Seek and choose for yourself. Search, inquire, and examine the face of Yahweh. Behold, regard and set your hope towards the stone from which you were hewn, and the hole of the prison from which you were dug. So now let's move on to Tehillim, or Psalm 40, chapter 40, verse 2. Our first word is Vaya Elani, which is, and he brought me up. This word is from Allah, which is not like the uh, Arabic word for their God, not the same thing. This is to go up. It's to be high, lifted up, also to go up. It is very often used in speaking of those who go from a lower region to a higher region. It's of ascending. Maybe I should have said that instead. It's to ascend. It's not of someone being high and lofty. It's not that type of thing. It's going from a low place to a high place. Then we have mibor, which should sound familiar because it's from the word bor, which is a pit, especially a cistern. Remember that? Okay. Now I want to explain to you ancient biblical prison. In the very ancient times, prisons were in cisterns. They were in dried up wells. And so they were basically, a well was a hole they dug into the ground so they could get water. A cistern was a hole they dug in the ground to catch water when it came down from the sky. So it's kind of the same thing, but it would be if the well was dried up, right? So it'd be like a cistern. They were basically the same two things. The only time they had water in it was when it rained. And so when they would dry up, they used them for uh, prison. Now, the further they dug down, the more narrow the hole became. And so then, if you got in trouble and they decided that you needed to go to jail, they would take you by your hands above your head and drop you down into this. So you go down and your waist would catch the walls because the further down you go, the more narrow it becomes, more cramped it becomes, and it starts to dig in. Now, if you move around a lot, you're going to go down even further, and eventually it's going to start pushing in on your ribs. Because remember, your hands are above your head. They're not down low where you can kind of adjust yourself. You don't have that. They're way up here high, and so adjusting yourself is going to be impossible. It's not like you're going to be able to grab a hold of anything and pull yourself up. So you're going to fall down into this. And the more you move around, the more constricted it's going to be in trying to breathe. And then they drop you down in there and put a rock over the top of it, and you are in absolute darkness. Absolute darkness. Well, I'm going to go ahead and tell this part because it's going to come up. Everybody that went before you, now, when you had to go to the restroom, they didn't pull the rock off. You didn't say, hey, jailer, let me go to the restroom. They didn't pull the rock off, pull you out, let you go to the restroom, put you back. No, you were standing in the bathroom. And so over time, the excrement and everything else that went down below would start to build up, and eventually your feet would be in this. Now, Jeremiah, remember it said that he was in it up to his chest? It's an absolute miracle that he survived that because he was in what they called the miry clay. The excrement was the miry clay. It's your excrement and all the excrement of all of the people who committed the crimes that went before you. That's what you're standing inside of this thing being crushed. Now, when it was time to be fed, the jailer had no obligation to feed you. Your family and friends had to do it, or you didn't get it. Maybe a bleeding heart liberal would feed you if no one else would. Not so much. They didn't exist back then. So if you didn't have friends and family, you better hope you had a short sentence, because if you didn't, you were going to die there. But if your friends and family came, it's not like they could, put the food in your mouth and stuff like that. Nope, they had to drop it down. They had to drop the water down. They had to drop the food down. So you got whatever you could get by leaning back and opening it as wide as you could open up, and whatever you could get by turning side to side, whatever the rats didn't eat. And think about what rats do when they eat. And that's also going to be on your shoulders as well. This was a nasty place, and people died there. They really did. So that's ancient biblical times prison. All right, so our next word is Sha'on, which is, we translate it as horrible. It's Hades, they say, a subterranean place full of thick darkness, in which the shades of the dead are gathered together, and to which are attributed both valley and gates, hell, purgatory, a hollow and subterranean place. You realize this is very Western. This is somebody who doesn't know their Hebrew very well telling you what the Hebrew word means. This is terrible. It's from the root sha'ah, which is to make a noise. Now we're going to get down to what it really means. used of waves, because waves crashing make a noise. It's the tumult of people. It's people arguing. It's Jerry Springer TV. It's to crash, as they use it in this case. An example, literally from the Bible, to crash as a horse falling down and hence to be laid waste. It's, in other words, a horse falling in death. It crashes to the ground. Uh, the idea of evil in the Hebrew world back in the biblical time period, evil was of the distorting of the face, but it was of the sound of a crushing blow, someone punching the face, someone breaking bones, of the screaming and the anger and the rage. Same type of root here. This is what we're talking about. And so when the translators saw this, and people who didn't really know their Hebrew very well, when they saw this, they would write this, oh, that's hell. That's an awful place. That's a subterranean place, right? That's all the Western spin on it. But you think of this place is the place that you came out of. All of the violence and the noise and the crashing and the violence and all of that you get from where? The world. Then it says mitit, which is Hebrew for clay, soil, mud, mire, clay collected in the bottom of a pond. Pond scum? They're trying to be very delicate with what they're trying to say here, but this is excrement. This is what we're talking about. And then it's followed by ha yaven, which is literally the fermented mire and clay, they say. It's from Yavan, the root, Yavan rather. It appears to have had the sense of boiling up or bubbling up, being in ferment. And so they think of wine because it ferments and that kind of stuff. No, this is the icky. They're standing in, I think you get it. Then it says, Va Yakem, and he set. It's to arise from a seat, from a bed, to stand. So it's from kum, obviously. So he took you out of this place, this miry place, and he set. And this is all, which is on or upon, right? It's on or upon. It's to set on something. And so if you pour a slab and then you build something on it, and then the slab is its foundation. So it's something built on it, put on a foundation. And in this case, it's selah. It's kind of it's a sound alike word, selah. You see that in the Proverbs or in the Psalms a lot. Not the same word, by the way. But this is rock. Metaphorically, God is called anyone's rock. In other words, his refuge, where he is safe from foes, they say. But it's from the root salah, which is having the signification of height and elevation. So it's not just a rock, it's a high rock. It's lifting you from a low place and setting you on a high rock. And this is ragle, and that's feet. That's your feet. Your feet are set on this high rock. And this is konen, which is established. It's from the word kun, which is to stand upright, to exist, to be. It's NPL, which is to set up, to erect, properly to set upright as a throne, and hence to confirm, to establish, to maintain, to found, as in a city. And so he's taking your feet out of this miry clay, out of this excrement that's gone before you, that's even yours, and you're buried in this, and you're constricted in this, and he pulled you out of this, and he set you up on this high rock to establish you. So then it's followed by Ashurai, which is follow me, literally. It's a step. It's metaphorically, steps are said to follow the footprints of God. I love this story. It's one of my favorite memories with my son when he was about 9. We went outside, it was snowing, and I took about 4 steps and looked behind me to see if he was doing all right, because it was, it was a good 6 inches deep. Woo, it was some deep snow. I turned around to see how my son was doing, and he was actually trying to step in my steps. So, of course, I started taking longer steps and walked all over the yard. He followed me all over. It was so cute. That's what we're talking about. This is the word. You're supposed to be following God. And this is a lesson that's so lost on the Western world today because they've been sold a pack of goods, especially among the Christians. And it's not just the Christians, but particularly among the Christians. They're told that the law passed away, it's legalism, it's bondage, it's bad, let's get rid of it. But the lesson that they've lost is that the law, God does not live by one, he doesn't live one way. He doesn't say, do as I say and not as I do. What's lost on the Western world is the fact that the law, the Torah, is God's lifestyle. It's how God lives. Think about it. God doesn't lie. He doesn't cheat. He doesn't steal. He doesn't run off with another man's wife. He doesn't wish he had other people's stuff. All of these things that we think of as the law. If his neighbor gets his ox in a ditch, he'll probably help his neighbor get that ox out of the ditch because he's not worried about legalism and bondage, right? The law is God's lifestyle. And so literally what they're saying here is that if he's pulled you out of that miry clay, out of that miry pit, and set you on that high rock, now it's time to start putting your feet in his footprints. Follow after him. All right, so here's my amplified translation of Tehillim, Psalm 40, chapter 40, verse 2. He took me by the hands and lifted me up out of a deep pit, the prison that I was in, a prison of death, a prison in the depths of hell, surrounded by a thick darkness, the darkness of death. And he pulled my feet out of the boiling, fermented excrement and stood me upon a rock, a high rock, which was his refuge, a place that is safe from my foes. He stood me upright, prepared and established my steps, and so that I would no longer totter, he revealed himself to me, so that I could follow his footprints. Isn't that incredible? Well, consider for a moment the following verses from the Sefarim Shaliach. It's what I call it that the Christians call it the New Testament. I get it from Galatians chapter 3, verses 6 through 9. Verse 6 says, even as Abraham, in English it says believed. Now, he's a man and he believed. Even as Abraham believed God, and it was accounted, it was hashav to him for righteousness. For Zadek, remember that? You should know, therefore, that they which are of emunah, of faithfulness, they say faith, of course, in the English Bible, should be emunah, faithfulness. The same were the children of Abraham. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Go'i, that's the Gentile, through emunah, through faithfulness, preached before the gospel. Remember what's the gospel? Our God reigns. It's that God has reestablished his covenant with Israel. That's the gospel. So he's preached the gospel to Abraham, saying, in you shall all Goyim, all Gentiles, be barach. They will be blessed. They will bend at the knee. So then they which are of emunah, they which are of faithfulness, are barach. They are blessed. They bend at the knee. With emunah, with faithful Abraham. Well, let's look at this. Aman, emunah, that's to prop up, to stay, to sustain, to support. Especially used to support with the arm, to carry a child. Also, one who guards and brings up, to sustain, to nourish, to found, to build up, to be stayed up. Hence, to be firm, unshaken, such as one may safely lean upon. Metaphorically, it's to be faithful. To be faithful is to lean and confide in anyone, to trust, to be secure. That doesn't sound like belief at all, does it? It's an action. It's a verb. Which I guess belief is as well. But we are not talking about what you believe. It's not about what you believe in here. It's about what you do. And when we are faithful to live out the Torah is what props us up. It's what sustains us. It's what supports us. To be carried in the arms of God when you're a child of God, when you're new to this and you're a babe in Christ, as they call it in the Christian world. When you're new to the idea of living God's way, you're carried in the arms, in God's arms, like a child. I'll never forget when my oldest daughter was born. I actually was in the room and helped to deliver her. I helped pull her out, but when they asked me to cut the cord, I was like, draw the line there, can't do it. But they had to do. I got to clean her and all that kind of stuff. They took her and put her on this table, and they let me wipe her with a cloth and all that. It's like this heat lamp is like, what are we going to put a hamburger up here and keep it warm too? Yeah, it was like McDonald's wanted me to eat. Anyway, so then they hand her to me and to hold her, and I'd never held a baby before, so I was like, oh, what do I do with this? And they were like, oh my God, what's wrong with you? And so they showed me how to lay her in my arms, and when she was out here, her arms were flailing, her legs were flailing. She started her little crying. She never put a lot of effort into crying, thank God. Anyway, so I put her in my arm, and I could feel her just snuggle in. Want to be held in the arms of God? You live according to the Torah. That's what it does. When you're new to this thing, snuggles you in, makes you feel safe and guarded, right? But as you get older, being in the arms of God is very different. Like a married couple, to put it as nicely as I know how, delicately as I know how. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to grow into, is that type of being held in his arms. And the one thing it's never going to change is your faithfulness to the Torah. Because if you want to feel the arms of God wrapped around you, you're going to have to live out the Torah. That's what emunah is. That's when they talk about faith in the New Testament. Mark it out, right? Faithfulness every single time. Yes, you're going to run into places where you can't make that make sense when you first do this. But as you go on and you begin to retrain your mind to think of it as faithfulness like you should, eventually it will make sense. All right, so then our other word was he counted it to him. That's hashab, which is to think, to meditate. The primary idea seems to be that of computing, of reckoning, which of course it is. To make an account of, to esteem, to prize, to impute something to someone. Then it's Zedekah. And you do remember that. That's the righteousness, the weight, and all that. The being right, to being in balance with God. That's what they're talking about. But this is going, which are the Gentiles. And this is Barach. The blessing, that's to bend at the knee, to kneel down. The primary notion lies in the breaking down. And so they compare it to camels, because they give a command to the camel, and the camel goes down on all four knees, and then they can take the stuff off. That's the breaking down. And then they load stuff on, they go on their journey, they put him down on his knees, and they break it down. So there's that going down on your knees, because when you're down on your knees, God should either be loading the burden onto you or offloading the burden. That's what those times, those down times are all about. The best part is that when God, when and they're literally called camel jockeys. I don't know if you know this, but I finally found out. The people who give the camels commands, they're not called shepherds, they're not called masters, they're literally called camel jockeys. It has nothing to do with nationality. That's just what they're called. When the camel jockey gives the command to the camel to go down on all four, if he doesn't, the camel jockey takes a little stick about yay long, maybe longer, depends on how cantankerous his camel gets, and he'll tap it on the back of the knee. Now, this is not take a baseball bat and try to knock something out of the ballpark. That's not what it's about. You could do it with your finger. It's just that if the camel is irritated, he's going to bite you. So you get something that gets you some distance between you and the camel, and you just tap it, because it wouldn't take any more than just a finger to get him to go down. But like I said, if he's in a bad mood, you're going to get bit. So you take the stick to give you distance. That's all that's for. But they'll tap it on the back of the knee, and it goes down. And so while it's down, they give it water. They give it food. But the more important thing is they take their hands and they rub the ears. Think of it the way you treat a dog. And you watch, I've watched them. They talk to them like a dog. Oh, you sweet little thing, you big old boo boo boo. Yeah, they really do that. And what's the funny part is when you start rubbing on a camel's ears, their eyes roll back in their head, and their head rolls back, and their lips go all funny, and they start going, roar, roar. They really like that, right? And that's the picture they chose to use, because when you're in those times where you're down on your knees, you're not out preaching the gospel, you're not out doing the work. When you're in those down times, that's when God's got his hands on your ears. Enjoy it. That's the blessing of God. So set your hope. Remember that you got to set your hope in faithfulness. You don't set your hope and God's going to give me this if I do that, and God's going to get me out of this if I never do that again. And no. Set your hope in faithfulness. If you're going to hope in anything, hope in God's Torah. Put it there. Learn the Torah, live out the Torah, set your hope in faithfulness, because only faithfulness all the way to the end of your life will get you there. Never forget the pit from which you were dug. Because a lot of people, when God truly reveals himself to them, they think they're on top of the world. And then as they go on, they realize just what low down, dirty scoundrels that they are. Well, that's okay. Because what you're seeing in is that you really did come out of a nasty pit. Because that's where God finds us all. Even when we think we're not in that pit. Because if you're born and raised in the pit, you don't know anything else. I was born and raised poor. Somebody had to tell me I was poor. I was in junior high before I knew we were poor. I didn't have any clue. But one of my girlfriends told me, oh, all right. Oh, well. Nothing I can do about that. So we live out our lives outside the Torah. We live in that pit, in that mire, in that muck, fermenting and boiling around us. And when God finds us, he moves the rock. The light comes on us. We feel the warmth of his light, reaches down, grabs a hold of our arms, and pulls us out of that. Never forget the moment when God revealed himself to you. That's a great moment. It may have taken you a long time to get anywhere with it, but that's a great moment. Never forget the example that God gave you to follow. It's the Torah. That's how you put your foot in his footprints. Each law is a footprint. He will reveal himself to you as he pulls you out of your dark pit. Because see, the learning of the Torah it's like the process of pulling you out of the pit. For some of us, it's going to go fairly quick. For others, it's going to take a very long time to get fully pulled out of our pit. But each step we take is one step further from the pit. He will reveal himself to you as he holds you up and establishes your feet. You realize he's going to hold you up until you can stand on your own? Shake your head yes with me. He's not going to let you go until he knows that you can stand on. You may not know it, but he knows it. And if he knows it, it's going to be all right. He will then reveal himself to you so that you can follow his footsteps. That's the Torah part. Set your hope in your faithfulness. Walk by your faithfulness, not by what you see. Because what you see will mess you up. Seek his face, hear his words, obey him in everything. Choose the justice and the balance. Pursue, inquire, and examine the face of your God. He is pursuing, inquiring, and examining you. Shalom, Shalom.